How you guys doing? You are not alone. Every single one of us is trying to find a way through a new year, through a new week, through this day, through this moment. We all get out of bed, we all put one step in front of the other, and we're all just trying to find a way through to be deeply known and still fully loved. A way to deep peace and honest to goodness joy. How do you find a way through the noise and the loud opinions, the very real challenges and obstacles that life keeps throwing at you? How do you find a way through to a deeply meaningful life? A way through to the life you've always dreamed of? You don't have to go it alone. Over the next 6 weeks, we could try to find the way through together. We're a large family with kids that range in age from 26 down to 7. And we're learning here at home. We're farming and taking care of animals. We are renovating a little stone church, looking for ways to reach out into our own community. And we're trying to work with our kids to grow some small businesses together, and reaching out to local and global ministries, thinking about how do we live our life well? How do we write a good love story with the whole of our life? We could figure out a way through over the next 6 weeks in gritty, real, honest, behind the scenes kind of ways, and find the way himself. Hey, so we had this crazy idea for this video series because we wish we could invite you all to the farm for like a week of crazy with us. But our first one isn't the vloggy, gritty kind of in real time that we hope the rest of the series is. Because when we went to tell this story, this was sort of a story that I wanted to include in the Waymaker book, but it didn't fit in the book. But it is the Waymaker story. So this first one isn't as vloggy as what we were thinking. It's more vlogish, dockish. So thanks for hanging in there with us as we kind of tell the story of what our life has been like for the last 2 years, 3 years as we've worked at the church. So we're just really grateful that you've tuned in, and we're looking forward to next week and crazy times. And I think Malachi is whispering something funny behind his mother's back.
We never know.
So the farmer, he kind of never balked once the whole long way. And I mean, he really could have only a couple of thousand times. But I'm just gonna tell you that it turns out when a man doesn't falter in trusting a woman, it makes a woman fall for him harder. But that's not the point of this story. Maybe it is. Anyways, I mean, the farmer could have straight up guffawed that day in the pickup. At the beginning of Lent, when I kind of shrieked right out there on Main Street, "Turn around!" And he didn't even bother asking why. Mainly because we've been married now a quarter of a century. And there are things now you just do without even batting an eye. He wheeled his pickup truck around in the parking lot because it turned out that I had read this sign in front of this old stone church that read, "Thanks for the memories." And to me, that kind of sounded like goodbye. Are they closing down the church? And he laughed and said, "So now you want me to drive around the block again, right?" And he was grinning a mile wide. And the man knows the quirks of his bride. And the day we found ourselves bizarrely standing here in an abandoned church with a real estate agent, I kept waiting for him to roll his eyes. I mean, who buys an abandoned old church? And why? I mean, it's more than a 125-year-old building. And there were no bathrooms on the main floor, The bathrooms that did exist in a corner of the basement had to be at least 50 years old. And who knew when some busted, rusty pipe would just like explode into a catastrophic mess.
I did actually have pipes that as I touched them with the pipe wrench, they poof.
There was no heating system beyond a handful of prehistoric cast iron radiators. And this is the Great White North. There were bats in the belfry. The farmer had grinned, and he knew better than to make any tongue-in-cheek jokes along the tempting line about bats in his wife's own belfry. I mean, and then there was the obvious. The church is about rescuing those who are down and out. So why be about rescuing an abandoned church? Isn't the church the body of Christ, not old stones and some battered steeple? But what if rescuing a house of God somehow allowed more to know the real rescuer himself? And I'll never forget the farmer standing in the shaft of light in this deserted church, and all these stone walls begging us to believe in a future for abandoned dreams, to believe where there seems like no way, that God makes unexpected ways in ways we'd never dreamed of. Standing there that first time under the stained glass windows, he had turned toward me grinning, and something in me kind of exploded. Beginning again at something feels like hoping again. I mean, I did ask him in the pickup truck on the way home, so what exactly are we doing here? Thinking about buying an old church. And he had turned to me, one hand on the steering wheel and his other work-worn hand reaching over to squeeze mine.
You tell me, did Abram have to know all the details of the plan? Or did he trust the logic and the ways of God?
I turned to look him in the eye. Abraham didn't know where he was going, but he knew who he was going with. You don't always have to know where you are going when you know you're going with the way himself. A life of faith doesn't demand knowing the destination because it's about knowing the guide. And I realized finding the way through to a life of meaningfulness means that you realize that faith is an exodus from the comfort of what you know into the unknown of the one who is your deepest comfort himself. Clarity for what's ahead comes from moving closer to the heart of God. That's a life of meaningfulness. If God calls you, don't worry about the way to the answer. Be far more concerned if you don't answer at all. The farmer is gentle because the man knows how to plant small seeds and talk to terrified sheep. And he turned to me and he said, well, what have we been reading over and over again for the last few weeks around the dinner table? He about had the passage memorized.
It's a passage from Isaiah 58. This is the kind of fast day I'm after. Sharing your food with the hungry, inviting the homeless poor into your homes, putting clothes on the shivering ill-clad. If you are generous with the hungry, and start giving yourselves to the down and out,
I will always show you where to go. That's what Isaiah 58 says in the message. God will show you where to go, the way to go. So I asked the Lord to show the way, praying and fasting all through that Lent. I've only laid out a fleece maybe 4 or 5 times ever in my life. But the farmer told me if I needed deep peace about considering buying an old stone church, to prayerfully lay out a fleece and to ask God to show us the way to go. So I asked the Lord if he really wanted us as a family to go ahead and buy an old stone church, one that we didn't even clearly know what we'd do with, could he clearly show me that he was the way maker? A clear sign that God was the way maker, or someone saying that God was the way maker before Pentecost Sunday. Because I really needed to hear from God if he wanted me to continue in ministry at all, if he wanted us to take this leap of faith in ministry with his own stone church at all. So there I was in the middle of the Lent, asking God if he deemed best, if by Pentecost Sunday, if he could really, really, really clearly reveal himself as the way maker. And for a week I just fasted and prayed and fasted and waited, sought God for any clear sign. But the days, they just went by. I kept seeking. I found myself Pentecost Sunday, thousands of kilometers away from our home farm, from our little country town with the for sale sign out here in front of the stone church. And I found myself in Lyon, France, at a gathering of missionary women from around the globe who all spoke French, where the worship and the Bible reading and all of the sharing, the speaking was all in French, and there were translators translating all of the French. And listen, I don't have the faintest idea what the word for waymaker is in French. So I confess, I really doubted that God could show up with any kind of clear sign. But during worship, one woman comes up to me and she says with a heavy French accent that she'd had a vision the night before of me being pulled from a miry pit. And I started to well up, like a pit of doubt, a pit of fear. And as we moved through the next French song of worship, another woman leaned forward to offer me a sketch she'd drawn, and she whispered, I had a dream last night about you, and I drew a picture of it for you to see. And I looked down at this drawing of a woman in a miry pit, and the pit is made of words that haunted me: failure, doubt, self-loathing. There's a hand reaching down to the woman in the pit. And at the top of this sketch, this dream, she's written this verse. Psalms 41, 1-3. I waited patiently for the Lord. He turned to me and heard my cry. He lifted me out of the slimy pit, out of the mud and mire. He set my feet on a rock and gave me a firm place to stand. He put a new song in my mouth, a hymn of praise to our God. Many will see and fear the Lord and put their trust in him. And at the same moment, I'm reading these verses from Psalms 41 at the top of the page. The French-speaking worship leader randomly pauses right in the middle of her French song, and she opens her Bible to read in English these words. I waited patiently for the Lord. He turned to me and heard my cry. He lifted me out of the slimy pit, out of the mud and mire. The exact same words from Psalms 41 that had been written on the picture of the dream vision given to me just moments before that I'm holding right there in my hand. And my throat's burning and I'm kind of coming undone when the worship song starts again in French. But one of the French women leading in worship, a woman from South Africa, she stops mid-song and she says in English, our God is a miracle maker and our God is a way maker. And I'm like this dam that breaks and everything goes blurry, and there's no pit of hopelessness, no pit of impossible, no pit of no way that you can find yourself in. We have a way maker who makes a way to us, to grab hold of us, to be with us, to enfold us in himself. The way maker makes a way out and makes a way into himself. I called home to the farmer and told him what happened on Pentecost Sunday in France. And no matter how you feel like you've lost your way or the way you wanted, the Waymaker himself hasn't lost you. All who wander haven't lost their hope, their courage, their grit. All who wander haven't lost their God. When the Waymaker makes his way to you, moves into you, no matter what is happening on your way, no matter what is in your way, you're already home and soul safe in him. So after we take this wild leap of faith and make an offer on this 125-year-old abandoned church, the next morning, the day after we closed, before I even wake up and I'm semi-conscious, it feels like, well, we've signed our John Henry to this deal, and we really don't even have a clear plan of what we're going to actually do with this church except this prayer of Isaiah 58. I fling myself out of bed. I'm sort of gasping like I'm drowning. And then like a bullet in nowhere, to all of my panic places, to all of my places that were struggling with faith, there's these four reverberating words kind of thunder in my heart. God is about restoration. Restoration. God is about restoration of broken hearts, restoration of broken dreams, restoration of broken justice, of broken churches, of broken relationships, restoration of broken hopes and dreams and ways, restoration of what seems the most impossible, restoration of all of us. And I had to take a deep breath, and I turned to the farmer. And I said, whatever in the world we are doing with the stone church, whatever that looks like around Isaiah 58, right there on the main street of a little country town, what if we fail? And the farmer had put down his mug of coffee on the edge of the dresser, stepped close. He said, hey, listen. He smiled. I would rather fail at this than succeed at anything else. At least fail at what matters instead of succeeding at what doesn't matter. Go hard and fast after what matters, helping those hurting and lost and looking for hope and healing, those out in the margins. Even if you go with your knees knocking, go the way that matters instead of going confidently in ways that don't. And we embarked with faith, not knowing exactly what the way ahead of us really held. But as we've weathered through the wild terrain of the last 2 years, we've all just kept working on the renovations as a family.
So with God calling us to rebuild this church that he had called us to purchase, then we now go ahead and take the next step, and we can go ahead and look at what needs done. The ceiling wasn't insulated, so we pull that down. We insulate the ceiling, we put it back up.
When we did the ceiling, it was a real party. We raised the roof. Okay,
I didn't get to help a lot with the floors because I was doing school, so finally I got to do that. But for the beams up over there, you can't see them, but we had to reshape it because it was, anyway. We put new beams up there and we had to paint them to match the same coloring as the other beams.
We needed to stop the water from the rains coming in. We looked at all the different rooms that we'd be needing most first, and the washrooms definitely needed to be changed. And we changed the washrooms over to make it so that they're livable again. The flooring needed redone throughout. That with much work, but also enjoyment.
Just praying and asking God for ways to, how will we use this space to reach out?
I remember so many times walking in those doors with a group of people. Sometimes it was friends to play volleyball, sometimes it was contractors, and they'd always stop and look up in awe. There's exposed beams and a brand new white ceiling, and the church just, it didn't feel like any of the buildings that you'd walk in. It was like a majestic cathedral of a building, and people would just stop in their tracks and they'd ask, so what's the plan with this? Because the building was empty and there was no congregations gathering here. And so we had renovated this building, and people would always ask, they'd ask Dad, and what's the plan? And I remember just thinking, it was sort of awkward because we didn't have one. But it wasn't for that. He'd respond confidently that God would find a way. And sometimes it was with different words, but it was always the same. And we'd always think, oh, this must be the way, this is the way, like there's a new opportunity here, God would find a way here. And with one thing or the other, it wouldn't. And it must have been something else.
And then, unbelievably, our local Salvation Army reached out to us with an idea. In partnership with the Bethel Reformed Church, the United Way, they'd been seeking a space to create a community warming center for all those who are vulnerably housed, a center they want to call Hope Links, to offer tangible assistance to community members in need of a space for relationship and community, in need of hot meals, access to showers, free laundry facilities. And because our Old Stone Church is right here in the downtown, its location is perfect. So they asked us, could we create such a space solely for that purpose, dedicated just for that? The farmer was like undone by the ways of God, because what have we been praying for the last 2 years? Well, we just kept working on the renovations, that somehow there would be a way to live out Isaiah 58 in our local community. You read it out loud to us as a family over and over again. You'll use the old rubble of past lives to build anew. Rebuild the foundations from out of your past. Restore old ruins. Rebuild and renovate. Make the community livable. It says in Isaiah 58, 9-12 in the Message. So for the last 2 years, we just kept renovating the stone church, believing the fast God wants us to go hard and fast towards those hurting on the margins. The fast God wants is faith that lets go of lesser loves to free fall into a far deeper love with Him. And find what we're holding fast to is only Him. The way we say yes to the vision of Hope Links in our space, so then we call in a plumber, an electrician, we walk through the space again and again with all kinds of community members, lean in to get a sense of needs, to get a consensus. So can we take this space and make it into a warm, welcoming space to offer hope to our community members? So after a whole lot of discussions, we come up with a game plan. The old kitchen would be torn out and and replaced with laundry machines and dryers. Washrooms and showers would be constructed, including showers that are wheelchair accessible. And we would create a gathering space that's both internet accessible, but also a place for people just to come in and enjoy a hot meal together. And a community drive was run on the coldest night of the year with funds raised. And a contractor from Bethel Reformed Church partnered in construction, and the cement floor was busted out, drains run, floor patched, level, painted, cinder block walls were laid, plumbing run, lights installed, doors hung, toilets mounted. With one contractor working with volunteer local church community members, they took on the washrooms and showers, and our family worked on the floor and the main gathering space, laundry facilities, widening the stairs to make the space more brightly accessible. And together, working with some local volunteers, walls were framed, many late nights erecting beadboard walls, and then together as a family, putting up a fresh coat of paint.
And so we finally, we've got a warming center with a basement. And so God is in it, and it may last for years and years and years. It may last for a couple of months, but whatever, it's God's plan. And so Mom and Dad have obviously trusted that the whole way, and it's got us here. And we're continuing to trust Him, and people continue to walk in and say, what's the plan? And we just say, it's God's plan.
The way through is more than a plan. The way through is an actual person. The way through isn't about having a plan you trust, but about having the person of God Himself who you trust. As we've renovated this old church, from roof to floor to basement to gym to kitchen, warming center, this is always when we've tried to think about is the way through. Keep your focus not on the whole map, but just on the next step. And that the direction of that next step is always simply moving closer toward God. And then let the way Himself make the way, whatever way He chooses is best. And as we keep making these final preparations over the next couple of weeks to open up this warming center, Hope Links, for these beautiful, precious community members, we as a family keep working together to finish up the laundry facilities and get ready to partner with the Salvation Army and the United Way to welcome those folks in off the street for a free hot meal. We keep putting one step in front of the other to another way of living that is committed to living out the truth of Isaiah 58. The way out of an age of outrage is always outreach. The way across your impossible is always to live like a cross and reach out to help someone through their impossible. The way through is always to walk through something with someone else. And no matter what we're up against, the way through to a meaningful life always comes down to this. The way out is always about reaching out.